So I'm sure all of you are already aware of the fact that this has basically come together from the ideas of a scrapped spin-off. I have to admit, the idea of watching a little show about young Jedi is relatively interesting. I say that, I know that sounds like a strange statement, but what I mean by that is I like the concept, but I've almost never liked the execution. I remember the Young Jedi tales, the books back in the day, and I remember that they sucked. So it would be kind of nice to see them actually do something good with it. This episode in particular is an interesting example. It's not a bad episode, it's just not a great episode. It is, in fact, fairly, I guess the word I want to use is predictable, as weird as that may sound. So, the pacing is good. They do some good things where they keep shifting perspectives in order to make it so you don't get too tired of any one given child at a time, and they don't spend too much time on the Wookiee or the Ithorian, both of whom don't speak English, and therefore they don't want to spend too much time, dragging on the audience's patience by going for too long. There's this bit at the beginning where it's like, the Jedi are running out of people, and I'm like, I just found myself thinking, well, yeah, I mean, they keep dying, right, because they're in a war. I wonder if they have, like, tolerance levels of who they will accept as new children or as new younglings to be part of the Jedi Order. And I wonder if those tolerances have been pushed back a little bit. Like if they're being more tolerant of who they'll accept right now because of the fact that they're in the middle of a gigantic war. It's just food for thought. I don't know. There's a little bit where it's like, hey, they find out that their true family is the Jedi Order. And I mean, I love how they really go out of their way to put a positive spin on the fact that these kids are taken from their families and never allowed to see them again. I'm just pointing that out. I am, of course, a huge and firm believer in the idea that family is chosen rather than something that you're born into. But at the same time, I find myself thinking, why is this a problem? Like, why don't... You know what? Never mind. Point being, the Jedi Order sucks. Let's just move on. I think we can all agree the Jedi Order sucks, at least as an aggregate. I like the bit where they're all like, yay, we get to make lightsabers! And I know that sounds so stupid. Lightsabers are cool. True fact. You can look it up. Lightsabers are cool. And I like the idea of the kids just being enthusiastic about the idea of getting lightsabers, because of course they would be. Wouldn't you? Oh, come on. Be honest with me. I mean, I'm a bitter, resentful old shell, and I would still get excited about getting a lightsaber. I'd probably never use it, because I'd be terrified of chopping something off, but, So, they go to this place. They go to Elam, which, of course, doesn't look anything like I remember from Tor, although it is at least still a snow world. And they talk about a couple of things there. This is actually an interesting mythos episode in its own little way. We'll talk more about the Kyber crystals in specific next episode, but what I find most interesting is that Yoda has a couple of bits of dialogue. The first of which is, a Jedi is the Force made physical, or the Force made physical is a Jedi, excuse me. Automatically correcting his Yoda speech there. Something about that statement appeals to me. The idea of the Force being manifested in the tangible plane because of a Jedi, or to be slightly more specific, because of a Force user. Now that's the way I look at it, but given the way that the mythos is actually structured, and the recent codifying, I suppose I want to call it, of how the Force works, it would make sense that the Jedi, just the Jedi, are the Force made manifest. This would also mean that, dark side users, Sith, etc., are basically an aberration, that they should not exist at all. But I don't like that version of the Force, so we're just going to move on from that. I also look at this whole thing. I've actually mentioned the term before. I wish I could say I coined it, but one of my viewers did. I forget whom. Please forgive me. During the KOTOR lore run. And that would be Force Attack. You've heard of Magitech. Well, this is Force Attack. And there's actually several examples of Force Attack across Star Wars, the most obvious one being the Holocrons, which are basically Force Attack in a nutshell, but also, of course, the Starforge. Force Attack, however, is an interesting concept, and I feel like that's what we're seeing here. There's this bit where it's like, we all have to concentrate together to open it. Why? They're not literally moving stuff out of the way. Instead, it gets the impression that it's going to react to put it into such terms, a harmonic resonance of multiple Force users at once. Force Attack. I also like the idea that the cave in general functions that way, that this is a constructed arena. Now, obviously, I don't mean like, engineers went through with welding torches, but I do mean that this place feels like most of the other force loci that we encounter throughout the course of this franchise. The most obvious and glaring example being the damn tree cave back in Empire Strikes Back. Now, I bring that up in specific because one of the common threads, and I do like this, of most of these force loci locations is that they themselves morphically adjust themselves to you, so that they are specifically challenging you in a way that you want to be challenged. I know that sounds like a strange way to put it, but the idea is mostly, let me put it to you this way, and of course this is all speculative, but if Luke had walked into that cave completely at peace, without any weapons, he might not have seen anything at all. He would have just walked in and been like, okay, interesting. I guess that works. But he walked in with baggage. He walked in ready to fight Vader, the one who had been overwhelmingly consuming his thoughts. So he walked in with a weapon, and he fought Vader. Right? Yoda says it so simplistically. Well, the only thing in there is what you take with you. So the idea is that each of these kids encounters something that they themselves brought into the cave, and the cave dynamically adjusts itself to adapt to that. And I took notes as we were going. Speaking of which, really quick aside, I do like the voice acting for the kids. I think they did a good job with that. It's pretty easy for that to go wrong for multiple reasons, so props on that. Anyways, so we see the Rhodian has to learn how to have faith and trust that things will work out, even in the evidence of the contrary. We see that the geek, who has been fiddling with his technology basically the entire episode, has to learn how to use that technology in conjunction with other aspects of life, in this case specifically the Force, rather than relying on it to the point of exclusivity. The Wookiee is the most obvious one. The Wookiee has to use patience, which is, I don't even feel the need to explain that one. The Ithorian is also fairly self-explanatory. Now, what I like about the Ithorian is the Ithorian was afraid. But courage does not mean not being afraid. Courage means being afraid and doing something anyways. So the Ithorian had to use courage. And the Rallier, she had to climb alone. She was the one who was biggest proponent of working together and working in a group. And she had to do the final challenge, well, the second to final challenge on her own. And of course, in the end, she was also helpless without the aid of her friend, who was the competitive loner, who had to help someone else rather than just himself. All fairly self-explanatory and all fairly obvious when you think about it. I just thought it was well executed. I also have a quick side thought. I like the idea that each of these kyber crystals, to continue with my earlier trend, has a resonance with any given Force user, and thus that kyber crystal will only manifest for them. But to explain what I mean by that slightly better, if I was to think of this in a setting-building term, in a less mythical and a more logical way, I would say that this cave is absolutely chock full with kyber crystals. Like overwhelmingly filled with them, thousands upon thousands. But until any given child manages to complete their equation, overcome their burden, manage to find themselves in a balance, a resonance, with the Force, only then will a crystal resonate back, and that's their crystal. Right? I just really like that idea, and I think it's well executed. Which is funny, because prior to now, most lightsabers and kyber didn't use kyber crystals. That wasn't even a thing. Instead, lightsabers just used, it was a very specific piece of engineering which used a very specific set of crafted crystals in order to be able to do that, and blah, blah, blah. Shadows of the Empire, the book, has a great example of Luke literally building a lightsaber and making stuff using things that he himself has done, and blah, blah, blah. And they talk about making lightsabers and being super quick and all that. Shrug. Whichever version you prefer best is up to you. If I'm being honest, though, and this is just my personal take on it, I like both. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I like the idea that a lightsaber can be built by anyone with the right tools and the right expertise, and can be wielded by anyone with the right tools and the right expertise. But I also enjoy the idea of a particular lightsaber having a literal, metaphysical connection to the one who built it through that particular connection with that kyber crystal, which resonated specifically with them. I enjoy both. And I don't think they're mutually exclusive. That's my take. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time.